Wow, we have a evening here for you tonight. Thank you so much for coming to the third annual gala for New Bedford Life. Give it up for New Bedford Life. You know, the pressure builds. I really don't know what we do next year. But first of all, thank you all for turning out tonight to support New Bedford Life. I know, I still hear some people talking. And there's only one person who should be talking now, that's me. So quiet down. Oh, better. All right, I don't care about me, but we've got some important speakers coming up. So, for the third time, Steve and Will Silverstein have opened this incredible place to us. Thank you very much, Steve and Will, for doing that. And for the third time, I'm going to tell you to look at this tie. This is the first tie I ever bought. I think I bought it in middle school, and it says Silverstein's on it. And if you don't believe that, because you can't see it in the back of the room, come up sometime during the evening, and you will see Silverstein's on it. I bought it with my parents down in South Water Street when Steve's dad, Joe, and Louis and Bernard, they knew everyone's name. They knew my grades. They knew my brothers and sisters. It was a personal place on South Water Street, and that's the tradition that Steve and Will carry on in this family business of the Silversteins. And it is, I will tell you, the only piece of clothing that still fits. And the reason it's the only piece of clothing that still fits is because I spend far too much time in all of Steve's and Will's of this establishment and all the other establishments. I was in the sale-off this morning. I was in the sale-off last night. Lori and I love to go to Cisco. 6 years ago when I retired from NOAA, they threw a retirement party in Washington, and Not Your Average Joe's was where they threw it. They didn't know it was originated in New Bedford, but believe you me, I let them know it did, because everything originates in New Bedford. Including New Bedford Life. So, thank you, Steve and Will, for hosting us for the third time. And I am one of the co-founders because nobody says no to Ken Hartnett, who is in the house. Where is Ken? Yes, he's over here. So a big shout out to Ken, who just celebrated his 90th birthday. His ideas are as young as they come. And so it's my honor to invite to the podium and please show New Bedford love to our CEO of almost a year, Leanne Camara. Please welcome Leanne Camara.
So I'm grateful to stand before you to extend our heartfelt gratitude to each of you. Your support is the driving force behind the Light's work. It is because of you that we can shine a light on stories that matter. You have helped raise community awareness library closures, the conditions at local immigration centers, the state of local jails, and significant economic development projects, such as the jobs pipeline in the wind industry and the commuter rail service. You have supported Spanish language news for the local Latino community and helped explore solutions to regional issues like the housing shortage. You have brought exposure to local arts and created public forums for community input and perspective. You have also positioned the Light as a leader in the nonprofit journalism movement. Our analysis of the local opioid epidemic was featured in the New York Times Magazine cover story earlier this month. And at a recent national conference, reporters from California and Oregon sought out our reporters to let them know that they read and follow our offshore wind and fishing industry cover and aspire to cover those topics in the same way. These achievements are a direct result of your belief in our work. We are thrilled to have an impressive speaking program this evening, and I won't keep you from it for much longer, but I do want to acknowledge a few others. To our founders, especially Ken Hartnett, who is your early dedication and vision laid the groundwork for the work that we do today. And to our board of directors, including our founding publisher, Steve Taylor, and our founding editor, Barbara Bosner. You have been essential to our success and growth. And to staff and our editor, Andy Tomalonis, your dedication and talent is what brings our mission to life every day. We are also grateful to our event sponsors. They are Ice Cube Cold Storage and Logistics, Raw Seafoods, Baldwin Brothers, South Coast Wind, Claremont Companies, Berry Investment Advisors, Landvest, as well as Alara Group. Thank you. I would like to extend a special thank you to our leading event sponsor, Serve Well Hospitality, and his entire Silverstein family. For 3 years, your generous sponsorship has been instrumental in the success of this event and has allowed us to continue our vital work. We are incredibly grateful, Steve. A few housekeeping items. We have 3 silent auction items. They're near the registration desk, or that other wall, the opposite wall here on the deck. We have 2 pieces from the Thomas Lynch Gallery and a sailing trip for up to 4 people by Steve Taylor. So if you're interested, please visit the table in the back. The silent auction does close at 8 p.m. The food and good conversation will continue after the speaking program, so please stick around. And we also have free copies of our guest speaker, Marty Barron's book, Collision of Power. So please make sure you grab one on the way out. It's at the registration desk. So before Steve Silverstein comes up, to all of you, our steadfast supporters, new and long-standing, another thank you. In a world where the landscape of journalism is changing, your support affirms the importance of a free and independent press in a democratic society. It allows us to be steadfast in our commitment to truth-telling and building an informed and engaged community. So thank you.
My wife Judy is here tonight, my son Will. In case you can't tell, looks just like me. And those of you know my dad. It's really incredible. My dad is a little over 97 now. Joe Silverstein, great guy. I wish he was here tonight, but he's resting at home. So as Dawn Williams had mentioned, this is our 3rd annual gala. Quite honestly, for us, this is the proudest day of the year. We all leave here with such good feelings. It's a very, very proud day. and we love doing this event. Just a small housekeeping note here. John Bullard helped me write my speech, and I did make a lot of edits to it. It's not as good as it was last year, but I hope it's okay. But I will tell you, I take responsibility for any grammatical mistakes. I'm sure there's some in here. Anyway, as was mentioned, the Silversteins have been in New Bedford since 1900. We have records back to then on South Water Street, as John noted, and South Water Street, south end of New Bedford, was the high street of New Bedford. In the 1960s, we relocated from the race riots to downtown, then eventually up to Kempton Street. And I remember my dad telling me, boy, someday wouldn't it be great if we could move to downtown like salt marshes. That was the big dream. One of the proudest things for us is that Will is the 5th generation Silverstein servicing the community of New Bedford. That makes 125 years. Will's 30 years, so he has another 50 years of hard work. And so the Silverstein should get to 175 years at least. And he has a little Silverstein baby on the way, so we should get We invest in New Bedford because we believe in New Bedford. It's people in the future. We've had so much fun here. People thank me all the time for what we do in New Bedford. I wish I could say it was really in pursuit of making New Bedford a better place. We do what's good for our business, and in turn it's been great for New Bedford. It's been this incredible circle of pleasure that we've enjoyed. We're really honored to do it. We love it here. Our success and our growth is due to the support that we receive from the people here, and so many others in this community, and others from the surrounding area, including Plymouth. Some people hate Plymouth, right? They knew they should come to New Bedford, but from Plymouth. Will and I are delighted to host this gala because we believe in Bedford Light, where we see the same excellence of service to the community that we strive for. It may have taken us 120 years to achieve this pinnacle, but the New Bedford Light did it almost out of the gate. Look what they've accomplished in such a short period of time. It's really amazing. This year, which is hard for me to believe will be following me, is a real legend, Martin Barron as our speaker. I know John's really stressed because he doesn't know what he's going to do next year. I mean, how can you do? But what an honor, what an incredible story. As you know, he's the editor of the leading papers, many of the leading papers in the country, including the Washington Post, where the tagline reads, "Democracy dies in darkness." Think about that for a second. Combining that with the light, which was named to drive out the darkness that we were seeing with the lack of quality investigative reporting in New Bedford. So it's a great tie-in. To be successful in business, you need to have a great imagination. It's very hard for me to imagine what this region would be like without good local journalism. You just think about that. Who would help us understand what's really going on in this place that we call home? It would be nothing else. Not just sports scores that we see in other publications or obits, but what are the issues that this region faces and the depth of the reporting that helps us to really understand what's going on. I read it religiously every day, and it's been very helpful to me. If it weren't for the light, who would hold us accountable? Not just the government, but industries like fishing, healthcare, housing, offshore wind, and even hospitality. That's why I'm behaving myself, detailing it very clearly. No matter what you do for us, if there's something to talk about, Steve, we'll be talking about it. So, he's kept me on the straight and narrow. Thank you very much. Without the latest on these issues, we're getting the news from social media, whatever the latest rumors are flying around the bars, and I'm not opposed to the bar chatter, but it's probably not the best place, it's probably not the reliable source of information. So we rely on the light. We have such a great place, there's a depth and complexity. It's been dealt a difficult hand. I think we're at our fourth regeneration now with what's going on here now with the wind in the restaurant business. But there's undeniable progress and the future looks really bright. Arts and culture remains a strength. As of many stories of individuals trying to this immigrant community, that's something that that really makes me proud of this community is all the immigrants and the success that they've made. You don't understand New Bedford in a day, or a week, or a year. You may not get New Bedford in a lifetime, but you have a much better chance to get New Bedford if you get the light. Enjoy yourself.
Steve Silverstein. I love you, man. and your generosity aside, the best fish. Thank you.
Look, I'm going to be quick. I want to yet again wish Ken Hart a happy 90th. I did say a little earlier tonight that it was like a day over 89. We still. Anyway, of course, it's my honor to introduce Marty. One thing, and Marty may be a little apprehensive about what I'm about to say, but he and I both know that one of the enduring tenets of American journalism is that reporters seldom have anything good to say about their editors. But tonight you get a hall pass. Just a couple of minutes, so I just want to share one anecdote that tells you a lot about Marty. On Sunday, July 29, 2001, the day before he took over as editor of the Globe, Marty read a Sunday Globe column by Eileen McNamara. It was about the secrecy surrounding 84 lawsuits against one priest, John Gagan, and the judge overseeing the case at the church's insistence had sealed Gagan's personnel records, which would likely shed light on how much the cardinal and his bishops knew about Gagan. In conclusion, Eileen wrote, "The truth may never be known." For Marty, that was catnip. Because what animates and drives him is this: journalism's obligation is to dig out the truth, especially when powerful institutions try to keep it from us. At his very first news meeting the next day, Marty said he intended to have the Globe's attorney file a motion seeking to have those personnel files made public. That afternoon, he asked the Spotlight team to launch its investigation, which revealed, as you know, that the Catholic Church for decades had covered up and enabled the sexual abuse of countless children by hundreds of priests in Boston and thousands in the United States. 23 years later, the moral authority of the institutional Catholic Church worldwide remains shredded, and largely because of Marty's commitment to the truth and his courage in pursuing it. As a journalist, Marty has no favorites, except the public. He has served so admirably at the LA Times, the New York Times, the Miami Herald, the Boston Globe, and from which he went on to a paper in the middle of the Atlantic Seaboard, the Washington Post. In this century, there has been no one in American journalism who sits on a higher pedestal than Marty, and deservedly so. Over the last decade, when American journalism has been under constant assault from those who would erode your freedoms, we have had Marty as the most articulate, forceful, and credible defender of the First Amendment and the public's right to know. Marty is here, yes, because we invited him, but also because he wanted to come. He is one of our many far-flung readers, and because he believes in the Light's mission to seek out and report the truth without fear or favor. Marty.
So thank you very much for having me here. It's a real honor to be here to honor the Bedford Light. By the way, as Steve mentioned, the motto of the Washington Post is "Democracy dies in darkness." We worked so hard to try not to use death and darkness in our motto, but we couldn't figure out how to incorporate light without making ourselves sound like a cult. And the New Bedford Light succeeded where we failed. So thank you, Leanne, for having me. Thank you, Steve, for the great food. I was already talking to Steve about maybe starting a great seafood restaurant in the Berkshires where I live. It's just on the other side of the state. It's in the real Western Massachusetts, which does not need Worcester, by the way. So anyway, what I wanted, and thank you, Robbie, for that. It was such a great honor to work with you at the Globe and to be your friend today. And such a great honor to have so many of my former colleagues from the Globe here. It's like a great reunion, a great reminder of an amazing town, courageous town that I worked with in Boston. So I know this is the third anniversary of the New Bedford Light. And that is an amazing achievement because as maybe some of you know, the very first newspaper in this country was founded in Massachusetts in 1690, and it was published and it was shut down the very next day by the colonial governor of the state of Massachusetts. So by that metric, the New Bedford Light is doing exceptionally well. And journalistically as well. What I really want to talk about, I did not prepare remarks, but what I really want to, it didn't seem like the right forum for a formal speech. But I want to talk about local news, which is not something that I have ended up talking a lot about more recently in my career because I got involved in what ended up being a very national and international story at the Globe, with the investigation of the Catholic Church. And then, of course, being at the Post covering national news. But my origins and my love is very much for local news, and it's incredibly important that you're all here to support local news in your community. When I was in college, my first summers were working for my hometown newspaper. I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and every summer, for 10 weeks, every single summer, I was working for the paper that I grew up reading. Covering the school board, covering the city council, covering the county commission, covering the courts, covering religion, of all things, covering business, covering everything that was going on in that community, and really understanding the importance of course, holding power to account, making sure that we were watching what was actually happening, but also writing about the things that really bind communities together. We have those dual missions, really. So when I got out of college, I started working for the Miami Herald, which is Miami, a big city. On the other hand, I wasn't assigned to the big city. I was assigned to a very small town. much smaller than, New Bedford is incredibly, like 100 times bigger. So there were, maybe 10 times bigger, I should say. There were 12,000 people in the town of Stuart, Florida, that's it. We had one movie theater, and the entire county only had 50,000 people. And it's amazing the kind of coverage at that time, that was in 1976, that we had for a community of that size. The Miami Herald had 2 people assigned to that town. It was about 2 hours north of Miami. The paper in Fort Lauderdale had someone assigned to that town as well. The paper in Palm Beach had someone assigned to that town. There was a thriving local newspaper there covering everything in that town. And then the papers to the north, in Vero Beach and Fort Pierce, were also covering that town. And we were all competing for those readers. And that is incredibly vibrant coverage that we've seen disappear in so many communities, and that it's so much at risk throughout the country today. We don't have people who are, in so many communities, you don't have people who are covering the county, the town councils, you don't have people who are covering the courts, or the police, or the environmental issues, as New Bedford Light is now doing here today. When I left the Miami Herald, I went and I worked for the Los Angeles Times, and I was a business reporter there, and there was, of course, a huge local story in the collapse of all the savings and loans at that time in the early 1980s, which had a devastating impact on real estate development, which had a devastating impact on homeowners, and on just the entire community. And so every place that I was covering local news. By the time I ended up as editor of the Miami Herald, well, actually before that, at one point I was assigned to cover Orange County, which is just south of Los Angeles. And at the time, it was the 5th most populous county in the country. Huge. The LA Times had 165 people covering just that county alone. And now they have maybe 3. I was just talking to the editor of the LA Times the other day, and I think maybe they have 3 people in that entire county, which is still one of the most populous counties in this country. And at the time, there was a huge local story. And sadly, we listened, because we didn't do our job properly, and it was a lesson for me all the time. It turns out that we had a treasurer in that county who was betting on interest rates with the advice from Wall Street, betting on interest rates, and before that, he was consulting an astronomer to see which direction interest rates would go. And I guess it didn't work out well, and the entire county collapsed, and it became the largest, I think what is still today, the largest municipal bankruptcy in the entire history of the United States. And that for me was a lesson that you always need to investigate even as a hint of wrongdoing. And there was a hint there. We started to investigate, we did a cursory investigation, but we didn't do a good enough job. And as I said, that's a lesson that always stuck with me. By the time I ended up in Miami as the editor of the Miami Herald in 2000, again, the incredible importance of local news. You may remember the case of Elian Gonzalez, the Cuban boy who was picked up at sea and became the center of intense debate about whether he should be allowed to stay in the United States. His mother had sought to bring him to the United States. She died at sea. He was picked up at sea, but his father was still in Cuba. And that is a story that consumed that community like nothing I'd ever seen before. Intense debate, intense conflict, intense ethnic tension in that community. And yet the lesson there was for us was to cover everybody, to listen to them, to listen to their perspectives. They were extremely different. Cuban Americans were feeling as if somebody had thrown a boy over the Berlin Wall, and they were being asked to throw him back. People who were not Latino, non-Hispanic, felt like, well, the young boy needs to be with his father. And we needed to reflect those very different points of view, and have people at least understand. They may not agree with each other, but they at least needed to understand each other. And that was our job, to be an informational bridge within that community. And then shortly after that, we had, well, it was a local story, but then it became a really national story. You may remember the presidential election of 2000. And I have to say that by the time 2020 came along, I was having flashbacks to what happened in 2000, and I was wondering, how is it possible that I am covering a constitutional crisis in 2020 when 20 years earlier I was covering a constitutional crisis in Florida? There was a case, of course, where the U.S. Supreme Court stopped the recount of the votes in Florida, and we at the Miami Herald, thankfully with the support of the CEO of the parent company, we actually went to all of the 67 counties in Florida and counted every ballot. Thankfully, Florida had an expansive public records law, a lot better than Massachusetts, I would say. Massachusetts is really bad. So every ballot was considered to be a public record. And we argued that in court and we won. And so we went around, along with a major accounting firm, EEOC, they counted the ballots, we counted the ballots, and as it turns out, much to the disappointment of the Democrats, we concluded that Bush actually did win by a very small margin for ballots that were legitimately cast and legitimately be counted in a recount. But we were accused of being trying to delegitimize the Bush presidency. That wasn't our purpose. Our purpose was then to just get the truth. Who did people really vote for in the state of Florida? And we feel that we came up with that, and that our results were actually later validated by a consortium of the New York Times, Washington Post, the Associated Press, the networks, everybody else came essentially to the same conclusion that we did. Then I came to Boston, and Robbie told that story, and that is how it unfolded. I was just looking for good stories, what's going on here in Boston, and I was a newcomer, or as I was often called, an outsider. People always used to ask me, well, what's the difference between the other places you worked and now being in Boston? I said, well, there's other places they call me a newcomer, but all of a sudden I'm here and they're calling me an outsider. How is that? So, very quickly, we got onto that story of the Catholic Church. That was a local story. That was a story in our own community, in our own courts, affecting our own the local citizens, and the local power of the Catholic Church, and the fact that, and most importantly, survivors of abuse who had not been adequately listened to. And now, that is not just a national story. It's not just thousands of cases around the country. It's many thousands of cases around the world. It is played out in Germany and in Ireland, of course, and in France, in Poland, and I was just recently in Spain, and it's an ongoing issue in Spain, where they've discovered, again, thousands of cases and a long-term cover-up, and sadly the Church continues to resist actually any reforms. So, embedded in our local communities are incredibly important stories. They can be very important within the community itself, but also can give us clues to stories that are national and even global in scope. And that's what happened. That's what happened here in Boston, and it shows just the need for a robust staff to be covering all of our courts, all of our school boards, all of our environmental commissions, all of the planning boards and the zoning boards and the town councils and all of that, because so much is happening in those areas. And if the press is not there, nobody's there. And as Steve mentioned, if the press isn't there, it just opens it up to the rumor mill. And worse than the rumor mill are the people who deliberately are trying to misportray what's happening, who are passing along not just misinformation, which is just information that happens to be false, but in many instances, what's come to be known as disinformation, information that is spread deliberately for the purpose of spreading falsehood to advance somebody's personal, political, professional, or commercial interests. And it's really important to have an independent, professional press abiding by top standards to monitor what's happening in these communities. Of course, that's really important at the national level as well. I did go to that place called Washington, D.C. I left as soon as I could, but I'm still in touch, and maybe a little too much so these days, I have to say. A lot of aggrieved calls, but there was an instance where we kind of see, I was talking about in 1690, the colonial governor doesn't like what's in the press and wants to shut it down. And, we had people in the high political circles who had portrayed the press as using every awful word you could think of, and amazingly continues to think of new ones. But perhaps worse is portraying us as enemies of the people. And that's had a dramatic effect. It's having a dramatic effect on trust in journalism, trust in journalists. The place to rebuild trust, I am convinced, is right at the local level. The most trusted journalists in this country are the journalists at the local level, and there's a good reason why. Because you know who they are, because you see them, you have contact with them. They're not just a talking head on television, or somebody you hear on radio, or somebody invisible on the internet, or anything like that. These are people who are actually out in their community doing interviews, holding up the highest standards of our profession. One of the reasons that I wrote the book that I did, that you're going to get a copy of, thank you for doing that, and thank you to all of you who might actually read the book. It's a little long, I've been told, but like every reporter, I told my editor, yeah, but it was a lot, I cut it a lot already, It's like, I don't cut it anymore, I don't cut it, So I have no idea how often I heard that from people as an editor, and it was such a pleasure to be able to say it myself. So, one of the things that I wanted to do with that book, by the way, was to give people a true sense of what it's like to be an editor of a major American publication. First of all, I was living through a historic moment in the history of the Washington Post and the history of the country. We had been acquired by, depending on the day, one of or the most prodigious person in the world. And then, of course, we had, Trump arrive on the scene, being a candidate unlike any we'd ever seen before, and a president unlike any we'd ever seen before. And I thought the history of the Post during that period of time needed to be told in a lively and accurate way. Secondly, I feel that the public has a widespread misunderstanding of how we go about our work as journalists, how we make decisions, the kinds of judgments that we're called upon to make. They are incredibly difficult judgments, and people assume that we make our decisions with the worst of intentions, when in fact, in every instance that I've seen, in every case that I've been an eyewitness or participant, we've done it with the best of intentions, but really struggling with some really difficult decisions. And in my instance at the Washington Post, we've been dealing with issues like the most sensitive national security documents in the country and whether we should publish that or not. And I wanted to explain to the public what are these decisions that we're called upon to make. How do we weigh these decisions? How did I come to my decision and my judgment? And you can agree or disagree with me on the judgments that I made, but my hope is that you'll actually understand why it is I made them. And so that was important for me to bring readers into the process to really understand what is the decision-making process and to sort of puncture the stereotypes and the assumptions about how we go about our work. And then the final reason that I wrote the book is that I've been concerned about our own profession and an erosion of what I feel are standards in our profession, and the real importance of us, and a lot of that has come about because of social media, because of people feeling that that a lot of our core values are under assault by the politicians of the present era, and they are. But I think it's really important that, I said something very early in the Trump administration that is probably the most famous thing I've ever said, maybe the only famous thing I've ever said. But it was when Trump said on his very first day in office, he went to the CIA headquarters and standing in front of a memorial for fallen CIA agents, what did he choose to talk about? He decided to talk about the press. And he said, as you know, I'm at a running war with the media, seeming to want to enlist intelligence agents the war that he himself was waging. And a couple of weeks after that, I was asked my reaction, and I said, we're not at war, we're at work. And that is what I believe. This is our job. This is our job. And I think when I think about our job, I think about like what was the original assignment to the press in this country? And the original assignment is embedded in the First Amendment. First Amendment, of course, talks about freedom of expression, and it also talks about freedom of the press and other rights. James Madison was the principal author of the First Amendment of the Constitution, and in talking about it afterwards, he talked about the need for the press to, as he put it, freely examine public characters and measures. So, of course, public characters being our politicians, our government officials, and people with authority and power who influence them. The measures being the policies that are put into place that affect the lives of ordinary people. And really, I hope we understand that. And the word to really to focus on is the word examine. And that means that we are not stenographers, okay? We are supposed to look behind the curtain and beneath the surface to ask why something happened, who pushed for it, with what intent, what impact will it have on people and on people's daily lives. And those are the kinds of questions that journalists ask. And that is our assignment. And that's why I said we're not at work, we are at work. And what I've tried to emphasize since I wrote this book and in writing the book itself is that we need to wherever we are, whether we're at the local level, the regional level, the national level, we need to adhere to the best and highest professional standards. And that means that we listen to everybody. We don't condescend to anybody in our community. We hold nobody in contempt. We need to hear and listen. We need to listen generously to what people have to say. Whether we personally agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. But we need to look at all of it. We need to listen to all the people who are relevant to a story. We need to look at all of the evidence that's relevant to a story. And then, using that, tell people what we have learned. And tell it to them directly. All right? Tell it to them straightforwardly. We need to be fair to the people we cover, and we need to be fair to the public, which means telling them honestly and honorably what we've actually found to be true. And to do that straightforwardly, directly, unflinchingly, fearlessly. And so that is what I try to do in my career. It's what I'm really talking about these days. I'm so glad to see that happening here in New Bedford. I am so excited by new nonprofits that have sprung up around the country. I'm on the board of the Knight Foundation, which is the principal funder of nonprofit journalism in this country. And I've been very encouraged by the entrepreneurial initiative that people have taken, by the journalistic initiative that people have taken, and you here in New Bedford are a wonderful model. I thank you for it, and I thank you for inviting me.